dangers of addiction. I've known since I was little that smoking gives you cancer and drugs turn your brain into Swiss cheese. And yet, I kind of sometimes wish I could be an alcoholic. It's not for the coffee at the meetings. It's not like I'm just bored. It's because I have another addiction that is much rarer, much harder to explain, and extremely difficult to manage. No, I don't eat drywall, nor do I groom my cat with my own tongue. My condition is classified as a body-focused repetitive behavior, or BFRB, closely related to OCD. It's called Trichotillomania. It's a mouthful. Most of us refer to it as trick. I usually just say, I pull out my hair. Hair pulling provides an escape from difficult emotions and anxiety, much the same way drinking does. Believe it or not, there's even a hair pulling hangover, which is when you wake up feeling like shit because of how much you pulled the night before. Instead of making our minds fuzzy with booze, we overattend to a physical feature to escape our negative feelings. For example, I'm a perfectionist with social anxiety. Editing this essay made me want to pull. Thinking about socializing after this event makes me want to pull. Pulling releases chemicals in our brains that we become dependent on, kind of like alcoholism, minus the DUIs and late Taco Bell runs. Late night Taco Bell runs. Eventually we pull even when we're happy. We make all sorts of excuses to pull, which we call permission-giving statements. These range from, I've had a shitty day, to, I'm so good at pulling, how could I deprive the world of my talent? I started pulling when I was 12. Contrary to what you might assume, hair pullers don't need a source of trauma to trigger the condition. It was probably brought on by puberty. That said, 7th grade is pretty traumatic across the board, so maybe there was a correlation after all. At 12, I hated my curly hair. I wanted it to be pin straight, like the pretty white girls. I spent hours straightening my thick curls and became fascinated by the new silky texture. I ran my hands through it nonstop, which is what we in the trick community call scanning. It's kind of like foreplay because we all know what inevitably comes after. As I scanned, the perfectionist in me noticed some hairs were different from others. Coarser, thicker, less obedient. They needed to go. Once I felt one, I zeroed in on it like a missile. I grasped it between my thumb and forefinger right up against my scalp, and then I yanked. And out came that offensive yet special hair, complete with the gel-like root wrapped around the end. Until that moment, my anxiety would mount, but then I'd feel relief. I'd play with it for a few seconds, strip off the root, break the hair in half, then I'd discard it on the floor. I became used to there being a pile of hair around me after I got up from anywhere. Often, I'd fall into what we call a trance, when we zone out, pull a ton of hairs, not even realizing what we're doing. I mean, really, my roommate could have been boning some dude in front of me and I wouldn't have noticed. But that never actually happened. As far as I know. After pulling for a few months, the consequence hit me. I discovered a bald patch on the back of my head about 3 inches wide. I'm not talking thin hair, I'm talking bald as a cue ball. Naturally, I flipped a shit. I took to wearing my hair up, frantically combing over the bald spot and readjusting my hair to cover it. By high school, I was sporting an involuntary mullet. I was too embarrassed to go to a salon where the main focus would be my hair. This is still a big fear of mine, by the way. Finally, my sister took me to a stylist friend of hers, and after cutting it off, it looked much better. Until I pulled it out a few days later, that is, and then I was shit out of luck when I wanted to cover it up. I resigned myself to the fact that I would have to live with unsightly hair. I strategically posed when I had to be in photos or just avoided them altogether, which is why I don't have any shocking hairless pictures for you tonight, and I'm instead representing myself as a cat. So many people take hair for granted in a way I never will. Usually when people describe someone as beautiful, they really mean they have great hair. But really think about it. This is why bad haircuts affect our self-image so much. I felt incredibly ugly, especially because I was doing this to myself. What kind of sick person was I? You don't see leading ladies in rom-coms pulling out their eyebrows and scalp hair. If movies have taught me anything, it's that Ryan Gosling wouldn't date a bald girl. Unless she was sick. Sure, I was sick, but not the kind that Ryan would tempt. I felt subhuman and ashamed, because shame is what hair pullers feel more than anything. After the relief of pulling has passed, we're left with an emptiness, followed by intense guilt and embarrassment. And then we pull more to feel better. Repeat cycle. Imagine this for a moment. You're an alcoholic. You're trying as hard as you can to stop drinking. But what if you had booze near you all the time and you couldn't get away from it? It's growing all over your body. You booze all the time. Bottles of wine in your armpits. Vodka in your vagina. That would make it pretty difficult to quit, right? Yeah, really hard. It took me 3 years to realize I had a serious problem, and for a long time after I was aware of my condition, I refused to acknowledge it. I wanted to stop, but it was laughably difficult when my vice was literally on top of my head. You know you're at a low point when you're fantasizing about having cancer, so you'll have a socially acceptable excuse to be bald. I finally hit rock bottom the summer after my freshman year of college. My self-esteem was so low I could barely function. My social anxiety was through the roof, and I had cycled through every style of hat imaginable. Except a fedora. Please note, even in the depths of my despair, I never wore a fedora. I'm very proud of that. I did fall into a deep depression. I stopped eating. Not entirely. I ate 1 egg and 6 almonds a day for 4 months. It's great. I went home for winter break and I was miserable the whole time and nobody noticed. Finally, I sat my parents down. 2 words in, I started bawling. They were horrified. They'd never seen me so emotional before because in our family, emotions are an inconvenience. I told them I'd been pulling my hair for 7 years and I really, really needed to stop. And they said, okay. And I found a great place in LA that specializes in hair pulling because you can find a shrink for anything here. And my parents told me never to worry about how much it costs. So really in the end, they are very supportive and amazing. I worked with multiple therapists and I was in a support group for years. I've been doing that all for 4 years now. Most of what I did was a targeted practice called cognitive behavioral therapy. I learned how to redirect my nervous energy into exercise and started using koosh balls and other fidgets to keep my hands busy. I started observing my habits and writing them down. Finally, I started respecting my feelings. I paid attention to them and I ignored the shame. These things began to help. Uncomfortable feelings surface when I'm white-knuckling it through an urge to pull. I'm working on being more in touch with myself, but I can't always think of the right words for my emotions, which, as a writer, makes me really mad. I do know I'm lonely. I constantly feel isolated by my disorder and even my recovery. When my friends are sad or lonely or hungry or tired, they go on a run or write in their journal or eat dinner or go to bed. Or just talk it out with a friend. Thanks to therapy and a hearty dose of Lexapro, I've realized I can talk and people will listen. Until tonight, only about 8 people knew about my hair pulling, including my family and my multiple therapists, and the time has come to share my story. When I'm feeling bad, my first instinct is to pull my hair, and since I don't do that anymore, I sometimes turn to other vices. I'll eat too much or cut myself, and even these alternatives will never come close to replacing the fix I yearn for. I try to avoid these bad habits so they don't snowball. I do, by the way, also drink when I'm avoiding pulling. If you have an addictive personality, you do a lot of hopping around. That's why alcoholics stand outside meetings to smoke, right? If only I could switch my addiction to like volunteering or financial planning. That would be awesome. It was once I stopped thinking of my pulling as a rare brain malfunction that I got it under control. I told myself I was no different from addicts at AA or Michael Fassbender's sex-addicted character in the film Shame, to whom I've always related. Once they're on the road to recovery, their audiences or supporters laud them as champions of a difficult feat. Just because their addictions are widely accepted, or at least known of, while mine is hardly acknowledged, doesn't mean I don't owe myself the same sense of respect. My addiction hurts me alone, but it does so in a deep, nearly invisible way. Relapse is still shameful and disappointing to me. My amazing support group and the Lexapro are how I got to a place of recovery. Classifying my hair pulling as an addiction isn't what the DSM-5 says, but it helps shine some light on the darkest area of my life. I can't let my guard down, and yes, thinking about the energy this takes makes me really angry. A lot of times I think, why me? But I'm on my way to accepting that nothing will ever perfectly replace hair pulling, and it isn't an easy or beautiful process. True emotions are ugly and messed up and all too real, but I think I'd rather feel them than pull myself into oblivion. So, here goes. Hi, I'm Keryl. I'm an addict. I'm 10 weeks sober, so somebody get me a motherfucking chip.